These are the top technology corporations in the world. Many of them are US companies, and we are all familiar with the amazing technology they produce. To many, these corporations illustrate the success of capitalism and its power to innovate and develop new and wonderful technologies. But is this story about capitalism true? Is capitalism a strong driving force behind technological innovation and discovery? The answer to these questions is a very simple no. Capitalism and its focus on competition for short-term profits is not good at creating new technology. Actually, it's not good at all. So if it wasn't capitalism and its most successful corporations, then where does this technology come from? Well, that is what we're going to find out now. We're going to have a look at all these corporations, find out where they got their technology from, and why capitalism only played a very minor role. Now before we begin, let's quickly have a look at what I mean by capitalism. In this video, capitalism will be considered as a market-based system in which corporations compete with each other without much or any state intervention. So the government's role in the economy has to be very limited. Governments are bureaucratic and lack dynamism. Corporations are entrepreneurial, and they operate best when they are free from government control. And only then, according to capitalist theories, can technological development take place. But as we will see shortly, this idea of free market capitalism is very mistaken. The so-called slow, bureaucratic and undynamic government has actually been the leading driving force behind technological innovation. So let's start by taking a look at Apple, the number one on our list. In another video I explained the very limited role Apple played in developing the iPhone. In that video we concluded that all the fundamental technologies that make up your iPhone were not developed by Apple. Apple itself is a poor innovator when it comes to new groundbreaking technologies. Make sure to check out that video if you want to know more. The link is in the description below. But Apple has other famous products. One of them is the Apple computer. So where do computers come from? Did Apple develop them? Or did others on the list do so, like Dell, IBM, HP, or component manufacturers like Intel? To find out, we have to take a look at the history of computer development, going back to the Second World War. The first use of electronics to make calculations was done by government-funded research in radar technology during the war, and some of the leading engineers on radar would later continue their work in computer electronics. For instance, in the construction of ENIAC, one of the earliest electronic general-purpose computers ever made. ENIAC was built between 1943 and 1945 to allow the army to make complex wartime ballistic calculations and to assist in the development of the nuclear bomb project in Los Alamos. While ENIAC did have substantial computing powers, it was big, heavy, clumsy to operate, and its vacuum tubes constantly broke down, requiring an entire maintenance team to locate and replace them. Even Apple would not have been able to sell this on a commercial market. New technology had to be developed to take the computer to the next level. One crucial step was an improvement in computer memory to store instructions. The developments in memory were first made in Project Whirlwind, which was funded by the US Navy to design an airplane simulator. Somewhat later, in 1949, the Air Force decided to make the Whirlwind technology the basis for a new computerized air defense system called SAGE. IBM was asked to help build 56 computers for SAGE. The company not only earned $500 million from contracts, it also acquired valuable knowledge in the process, which gave it its leading position in the up-and-coming computer industry for decades. The other major limitation of the earliest computers like ENIAC was their reliance on big and vulnerable vacuum tubes. The major breakthroughs in developing an alternative technology, the transistor, was made in the famous Bell Laboratories, which was part of AT&T, a giant telecommunication corporation. Because the transistor was created in a laboratory owned by a giant corporation, it is sometimes used as proof that free market capitalism based on competition between corporations, without government involvement, generates new revolutionary technology. A closer look, however, reveals the opposite. The major force behind the development of the transistor was the US military, initially the Army Signal Corps, which was interested in smaller and miniaturized communication equipment. The Army also realized that transistors could be useful in digital computers. The US military therefore began funding research at Bell Laboratories, up to 50% in 1953. At the same time, because of the high cost of transistors, nobody wanted to buy them, so the military and NASA became the most important buyers until well into the 1970s. This can be considered as another form of government subsidy. Interestingly, government intervention does not end here. AT&T, the corporation that owned Bell Laboratories, operated under a government-granted monopoly. Monopolies are the ultimate violations of free market capitalism. Following the invention of the transistor, the development of integrated circuits allowed many transistors to get interconnected and to be placed closely together. The military and NASA saw great benefits in this technology, for instance in rocket and space programs, and they drove this development forward. They were also important markets for the early microprocessors. Together, the developments in memory, transistors, and microprocessors opened the door for the personal computer and commercial electronics. So this whole system is not anything like free market capitalism. It's more like the opposite. So, computers were not developed by corporations competing within a capitalist free market system. It was mostly government-funded research. And before we continue with our list, there is a crucial point that has to be made here, which is understanding the way the game is played. So when it is government-funded research that developed the computer, this government money has to come from somewhere. It is in fact taxpayer money. This means the US taxpayer has funded the development of the computer. Now, if the United States truly had a capitalist system, this means that the US population, having made an investment in the computer, should share in whatever profits are made. This, of course, is not the case. Instead, US citizens, if they want to make use of this technology, have to pay again, this time to the corporations, to buy a computer. So the key point here is that US citizens pay twice. Meanwhile, the corporations who got their hands on technology they did not develop themselves keep almost all of the profits. It's a clever way to transfer money away from the population and towards those who own and control the economy. Now the point here is not that this whole system is necessarily bad. It makes sense that inventing something extraordinary like the computer requires enormous investments over a long period of time. Corporations that are aimed at short-term profits will typically not do this. But when everyone in society contributes a little bit, it allows teams of scientists and engineers to work, sometimes for decades, on technology that will improve our lives. The unfair thing about the so-called capitalist system in the United States is that instead of letting everyone share in the benefits, the money overwhelmingly goes to a small group of people who control the economy. They have hijacked the major system of technology development in the United States. And this is the case with most of the major technological breakthroughs. The next two American corporations on the list are Alphabet, better known as Google, and Facebook. Both are internet companies, and both had no role in creating the World Wide Web. The internet has its roots in the late 1940s, when the US Air Force decided to develop a communication network for its air defense system. Military research continued and ultimately developed all the hardware and software that makes up the internet. Meanwhile, thanks to the European taxpayer, researchers at CERN were able to develop the hypertext markup language, the Universal Resource Locator, and the hypertext transmission protocol. In the case of Google, its dependence on the US government goes even further. Larry Page and Sergey Brin developed their Google algorithm while the research was funded by the government, namely the National Science Foundation Digital Library Initiative. Again, the state provided the funds and opportunities for them to innovate. Microsoft, the number 6 on the list, is also an interesting case. In a world without computers and the internet, which Microsoft did not develop, the company would of course not exist. Also, the origins of computer languages like C go back to the early years of computer research conducted in government-funded laboratories. Most of Microsoft's core applications are written in the family of C languages. Also, Microsoft's Internet Explorer was based on the source code of Mosaic, a National Science Foundation-funded web browser. Of course, this system extends beyond just electronics. Commercial airplanes came out of research conducted by the US Air Force. Revolutionary airplanes like the DC-3, the Boeing 707 and the Boeing 747 are basically military aircraft, modified by companies like Boeing, who depended on government, meaning taxpayer money, for this technology. But things like supercomputers, lasers, biotechnology, nanotechnology, nuclear energy, telecommunications, GPS and many others all come from this government system. It is telling that the major technology corporations in the United States played only minor roles in developing the technology that made them great. The question why capitalism and these corporations can't create any new groundbreaking technology has a clear answer. Corporations are institutions that compete with each other for short-term profits. One direct result is that they like to reduce risk and reduce cost. Developing the technology of tomorrow, however, is highly risky and very costly. Research and development is expensive, and it is unclear if and when any marketable technology will come out of it. This is where the state provides a solution. It collects taxpayer money and then uses this money to fund research projects, together with the corporations and elite universities. In these projects, the state typically provides most of the funds and by doing so pays most of the cost and takes most of the risks. Only when the state guarantees subsidies and markets are corporations willing to join in. And if in the end, the research and development results in technology that can be sold to the population, the corporation, thanks to participating in the project, has usually acquired the technical expertise to start producing this technology themselves. We as consumers then end up buying that technology from those corporations, even though we are the ones who paid for that technology's development in the first place. And in the process we are made to believe it was capitalism and corporations that created it.